Hey, you guys. Um, I'm going to be making two videos today. I wanted to do this one to kind of get it out of the way. This is a video that's not going to appeal to every person, but I did get several questions. What in the world? I feel like I can hear myself on this. Hold on. Okay. Anyway, do I sound staticky? If I sound staticky, let me know because I feel like I'm getting feedback. Hey, Finbell. This video is not I'm getting feedback. Why? Hold on. That's weird. I shouldn't be able to hear myself, but I feel like I can hear myself. Okay. Anyway, let's hope that you guys can hear me. Oh, I sound clear. Okay. Well, then I won't worry about it. All right. So this is a live that will not apply to everybody. Years ago, and it was years ago, I made a video that was titled Working Without a Social Security Number. And I broke down because for those of you who don't know, um, I have children who don't have birth certificates or social security numbers. And a lot of people, especially with the free man movement and the Moorish movements and all these different movements, are exposed to people who really are lying about how you operate without those documents. But as a person who does it legally, I wanted to just share like legitimate government resources, um, legitimate laws. It's not super complicated. You don't have to like write weird letters or do weird things. It's really quite normal. It's just not normal for poor people. But I get so many comments on that video, so many questions, and I've had several people over the years reach out to me privately and ask for help because they were having a baby, or maybe their parents didn't give them a birth certificate or social security number, or maybe they had a birth certificate but not a social security number. Just people approach me pretty regularly, right, about that. Over the years, I've had a lot of families, a lot of individuals just contact me for help with that. And so recently somebody asked me a question, and I wanted to make sure that I answered it, but it was just too lengthy. And so I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to answer a few of the commonly asked questions that people send to me. And so, for those of you who are interested in this topic, those of you who are interested in not having a birth certificate or social security number for your children, number one, I'm not going to talk about how that's possible or how you get a passport or how they work in this video because I actually made an entire other video, which I will link it down below actually. And I'll also probably drop a card that you guys can watch. And I provide all the resources, all the paperwork you need, everything, links to everything in the description box. This is going to be purely to answer the questions that that first video brought up and nothing else. Okay. So let's get into it. So the first question was, is this information only for Americans? Yes. And this includes people who are here illegally. If you are here in the United States illegally and you're undocumented, then you cannot use my advice for getting a US passport, working or operating, getting bank accounts or anything in the United States without a social security number or birth certificate. You cannot. You do have to be born on American soil. You do have to be born on American soil. Um, the next question is, what about becoming a secured party creditor and UCC filings? Okay, so I feel like this person was probably listening to the free man on the land movement or the Freeman movement. Those people overwhelmingly they take law that do not apply to anything and they go overboard and they want you to write a bunch of letters and go into court and act retarded and all this stuff, right? You don't need to become a secure party creditor. You don't need to worry about UCC filings. It's not that deep. These are people who make long, complicated videos. They sound like they know what they're talking about. They reference all these laws that are not relevant, and they never provide you with resources, which is why on my original video, which you guys can check out, and maybe I'll even, put the resources in this video when I'm done with the live. That is why I gave you guys real resources. And on my video, I go to the government websites and I show you that these things are the law. I'm very transparent. I'm very clear. I tell you what forms to use. I talk about the laws in various states. These people who are talking the secured party creditor UCC filing thing are weirdos, if I can be honest. They're weirdos, and the things that they're saying are likely to get you into jail, right? So, another question was, what if somebody doesn't have the money or resources, um, or a family member that they trust, etc., to help them? The reality is, if you're looking to operate outside of out of the system, so if you're looking to live without a social security number, if you're looking to live without a birth certificate, if you're looking for your children to do that, as I explained in my first video on this topic, you are going to give up some rights, or some privileges, I should say. You're going to give up rights when you get the documents. You're going to give up privileges when you don't have the document, right? So, some of the rights you give up when you get a birth certificate or social security number for your child, because most of us already have them, is you then have to pay taxes, right? There is no way out of taxes. This was a big thing I had to explain in my first video. If you have a social security number, if you get your child a social security number, you have to pay taxes. Okay, that's part of the deal when you take a social security number. That also gives you access to government programs. For example, with these stimulus checks, my children didn't qualify for the stimulus money because if your children don't have social security numbers, then you don't get that benefit, right? Or I couldn't go and get welfare or anything like that. So when you choose to live without a social security number or birth certificate, you will have to do a lot of things cash. Many of you know that I provided a list of pediatricians, things like that, on my vaccination video who are modified or no vaccine friendly doctors for your children. A lot of these services will have to be paid cash. Now, if you have insurance through a company, I have dealt with many people over the years who have come to me and they've had questions about their specific insurance. For the insurance that we use, for example, you pay a $50 a year penalty if you don't provide a social security number. Each private insurance company's policy is different, right? And I also did talk about how if you don't have a social security number or birth certificate for your children, but you are poor and you want to utilize government services, I did talk about how that's possible. But to give a quick rundown, well, I can't. But I guess I can because I said I would make this video to answer people's questions. If you are poor and you don't have a social security number or birth certificate for your children, like if you're looking to give them that freedom, then what you can do is you can go to like your local children's hospital, or things like that. And when you go in, let's say if you go to the emergency room or if you go for a doctor appointment at a place that accepts the state medical program for children, then they will give you an opportunity to apply. And when you apply, you will get 30 days worth of coverage. So the office will apply for you. They'll zero out the social security numbers, and then you'll have valid insurance for 30 days. And I would say during that time, go get all your dental work done for your kids, get all their doctor's appointments in, all of that kind of stuff. After 30 days, if you don't provide a social security number, they'll send you a notice requesting it. Obviously, you won't have one, and so your insurance will expire. You will have to do that every single time if you are a poor person, right? So there are many like nuances for people who are poor, but I'm not going to lie, it's going to be more difficult because you cannot get, unless you're in a safe harbor state like California where they uh, help illegals. But I'm going to tell you something. A lot of these laws that help illegal aliens, when an American tries to use them who doesn't have a social security number or birth certificate, Americans cannot use those programs. So the reality is when you opt out of the social security program or getting a birth certificate for your child, you are just not going to have access to a lot of programs. I mean, they give people who are not United States citizens more rights and help a lot of times than United States citizens if you aren't playing by the rules. And that's just the reality. I was very transparent about this in my very first video that I made on this topic. Because I think a lot of people have a fantasy about it, and I want to be realistic with what I said to people. So the next question that I had was so somebody asked me, my son is 3 years old. We had a home birth with no midwife, only my wife and I. Do you have any advice on getting a passport? So, yes, you don't need a midwife to attend. You don't need wife you don't need a midwife to get a passport for a child. What you will need is you're going to need early doctor's records and you're going to need that affidavit. So those of you who saw the video may remember that I talked about in order to get a US passport for a person who doesn't have a birth certificate, you have to have a letter of no record from your local records office. Some places I've heard make you go to the state level so that they can be sure that that child wasn't born in their state. So you'll get a letter of no record from there. You will have to do an affidavit. The our passport office has that form, and I will link all the forms at the end of this video, or you can go to my other video, and I've linked all those forms. So our passport office has a form, and it's a form that you get notarized, and you have to have two people sign it who were present, two adults sign it, who were present for the birth of a child, that child. So they're going to sign that to say, I verify I saw this child being born on United States soil, is essentially what it says. And so you'll take your letter of no record from the records office, you'll take um, your signed affidavit, and then you're going to want to take your baby to well baby checkups, right? If you're Christian, get your baby baptized. You can use a baptismal certificate. If you have a family Bible, even if you're not Christian, I would advise getting a family Bible and logging the births on there. These are all documents that I would take with me to the passport office, and that's all you would need to be able to get. An infinite passport. But as far as if your child has never had a doctor's visit, you need early records. So take your child to their well baby checkups, okay? You have to do that. You need early childhood records. Otherwise, any illegal alien could come in the country and claim that they didn't have the records, right? So you do need something early. Like I said, baptismal certificates, early childhood doctor's appointments, all of those things. Make sure that you get them, okay? Otherwise, you will not be able to get your child a passport. So hopefully that answers your um, question. Somebody asked, would a record of no birth and a DS-10 not be enough? No, a record of no birth and a DS-10 form will not be enough to get your child a US passport. You need those early childhood records, right? You need the early childhood records. I feel like sometimes I'm not sure if illegals come and they're hoping for a way out, but it's like, no, you need the early childhood records. It's the way that they verify that the child was an infant in this country. Okay. Another question is one doctor's visit, a record from one doctor's visit enough? No, I would take several records, right? The passport's office is to verify they're giving out valid passports. So take as much information as you have. If you had a child born in the hospital, a crib sheet. I did talk about how to leave the hospital without applying for a birth certificate or a social security card. I'm not going to go into that again here. Please go see my old video titled Working Without a Social Security Number. I will make sure to attach a link to it in the comment section and in the description box of this video. But in that video, I describe how if you want to have a hospital birth, you can leave the hospital without a social security number and a birth certificate. I've personally done it more than once. So I do describe my experience and I'm pretty honest about how that process works. All right, let's see. What is the next part of the video? Um, so some people were making the argument that if you have a social security number, you don't have to pay taxes and you can like turn your social security number back in and like say you don't want it anymore. And that is a lie. You cannot. Getting a social security number is not mandatory. Once you have a social security number, you do need to pay your taxes unless you're going to just only work under the table and you're not going to have any money the government's going to know about. You have to pay taxes. The only way to get out of paying taxes is to literally not have a social security number. You can use other tax identifier numbers. I talk about that in my first video. I talk about, incorporating even your name. So, you know how you have like Charles Schwab? Charles Schwab is a person's name, but Charles Schwab is a corporation. So that is an individual whose name is Charles Schwab. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Charles Schwab, but it's a multinational company. Um, and then he created a company in his own name named Charles Schwab. And Charles Schwab, the company, operates as a corporation. Now, that is not like you as an individual being a corporation. I know, don't get that confused. I'm saying you could start a business and name your business after yourself and then use a a TIN, a tax identification number for your business. But if you as an individual have a social security number, you as an individual need to pay taxes. And that is just what it is. Please don't listen to people that are telling you otherwise. They are not telling you the truth. Somebody asked, had this been done in Texas, that when they went to their vital statistics office to get the letter of no record, this person was told that they don't do that and it's only available at the state level. Um, so you can get a letter of no record from your local office, but you have to understand, and I've said this before, that many local offices are not familiar with it. I mean, almost everybody gets a birth certificate and a social security number at birth. So they don't get many people coming through requesting a letter of no record. If you go in, what I would do is I wouldn't go in there being like weird. I would go in and say I would print off what the US passport office asks for, okay? And I would go in and I would say, I have this from the US passport office and I don't have a birth certificate for my child because we never got one, but they said I needed to come down here, show them where the US passport office says that you need a letter of no record and say they basically say I have to come down here and ask for a letter of no record. So you have to put in an application to get a copy of the birth certificate. And then when they cannot find it, okay, when they say they cannot find it, then you ask for the letter of no record and let them know why you need a letter of no record. Okay. So that's how I would do it. If you just walk in and you're like, hey, I need a letter of no record, a lot of people won't know what you're talking about. You have to apply for a copy. And then they're going to come back and say, we don't have a copy. And you're going to say, well, here, the passport office, and show it to them, says if I can't get a copy of my child's birth certificate because I know I don't have one, we never applied for one, that I need to get a letter of no record for you guys, from you guys. And then at that point, you'll get your letter of no record, right? Make sure that you are nice. I think a lot of things is how you carry yourself and not being like weird about it. A lot of times, especially if you watch like the Freeman people and the Moors and like all these people, they start acting like low key weirdos. Like just be a normal person, you guys, okay? Don't try to go in there educating them like, I'm here to get a letter of no record so that I can get a passport without a birth certificate. Like, don't be over the top. Go in like a regular person, apply for a copy of the birth certificate. They will come back and say, hey, are you sure you got all the information correct? Da da da. Say, actually, I've never gotten a birth certificate for my child, but right here for a passport, I was told, and then show it to them that I needed to come here and try to see if you guys had a record. And if not, request a letter of no record. And then they will give you what you need. Now, if you have a state that does it at the state level because maybe they think you have the wrong county or something like that, then go ahead and go to the state office for vital statistics and do the same thing. You know, a lot of times it's because it's hard for people to believe that you don't have a birth certificate. So they'll probably tell you to go to the state office because, that way we can be sure you weren't born in the state, right? Now, somebody at some point in time will likely ask you to, if you need a birth certificate or whatever, and you can just say, oh, the process, don't get argumentative. Oh, the process takes a year. I really just need this letter of no record so that I can travel, with my child because this is what the passport office is asking for. It is a document that they're required to give you. Our passport office would not ask for that document if they didn't need it, right? But a lot of times, remember, people are resistant simply because they're not used to giving them out. Not because you can't get them, but if you act kind of neurotic or like a weirdo, it's going to turn them off. If you just act normal, then you'll get what you need much easier. I feel like a lot of people go in there and they try to be like, how the freemen are under section XYZ and, blah, blah, blah. I'm a free man on the land and blah, blah, blah. Like, if you're going to be stupid and retarded, you're going to get stupid, retarded results. So just be a regular human being. You don't need to quote any statutes. You don't like just go in there and, and do as I just said, as I described. Okay. Red Wine said you can be sovereign and not pay taxes, but you need to own land, military, etc. There's sovereignty is not okay. I hate to get into conversations about sovereignty because it's silly. It's a silly conversation about sovereignty to me because number one, you can't be sovereign in the United States unless the United States agrees to let you be sovereign. They're just going to send the police officers and whoever to arrest you, right? The only sovereign people in the United States are Native Americans, and they have an agreement with the United States government to have land that has its own government and all of that. Um, the only other sovereignty you're going to get is through socio-political revolution. And unless people are about to get the revolution popping, I don't personally entertain conversations about that. What I'm talking about now is not, like I said, the Freemen and all these movements, they make salacious videos that are silly. The video that I made originally on this is a solid video. I personally um, don't have these documents for my daughters, and for my son. And so I'm telling you in real life, as a real person who doesn't have these documents and follows the law of the land, that it is legal to not have these documents. And you don't need a military, you don't need to be a sovereign, you don't need to, kill the straw man. You don't need you don't need to do any of that silly stuff, okay? Because the laws of the United States, they actually exist for people to not have these documents. It's just a matter of, do you know, right, the process or not. So I don't get into the other conversations because in my decision not to get birth certificates and social security numbers for my children, I found that those advices were not true. And so I'm speaking from a real person that lives their life this way, not from a YouTube troll that's rattling off things they don't know what they're talking about. Like I said, my first video is extremely comprehensive. Like I take you to various government websites. I show you what's required. I give state examples, like how it works in each state. I go into exactly what documents you can use to work if you don't have a social security number. Um, like I definitely, if you guys go watch my first video, you'll see that the information I provided is very different from probably anything else you've heard on YouTube, because I'm genuinely just telling you the truth. And a lot of people have come to me personally, like I said, off of that YouTube video and asked for help. And I've kept it on the level with them about what they need to do. So, yeah, as far as being sovereign with the military and all that, no, not unless you're going to have a revolution. There are no sovereigns in America other than the Native American people. And they're only sovereign when they're on Native American territory. And that just is what it is. I think a lot of times people don't want to have a revolution and they get off into left field with other conversation. I don't entertain those conversations. I entertain things for people who want to own homes, who have bank accounts, who are just wanting to be regular citizens in the United States, but they don't want those documents because those documents do remove a lot of your personal rights, right? When you apply for the Social Security program, because that's what, whether you realize it or not, getting a Social Security card does. When you opt into getting a birth certificate, when you do those things, you do lose personal rights. And so I'm coming from the perspective of, if you want to be a law-abiding citizen that's not doing weird extreme things and not have those documents, how you can do that, right? So so with that said, oh, okay. So for the midwife, I'm so glad you said that, CJ. I've actually had people come to me who have had midwives. And the midwife, okay, so I really want you guys to listen to me. This is what's going to happen, because I had this happen with one of my children. When you have a midwife or when you give birth in a hospital, the hospital and your midwife by law have to, let me put your comment up. She doesn't give you a birth certificate. She does not give you a birth certificate. Let me explain to you what happens. When you give birth in a hospital or you have a home birth that is midwife assisted, they are mandated to report your child's birth. Now, this will not give you a birth certificate, no matter what she says. What will end up happening is you refuse to sign any papers. That's what you do. Don't sign any paperwork for the birth certificate, but she's got to still report it. Now, your midwife is not going to be comfortable with you not signing the paperwork. As a woman who's given birth in a hospital in California, I can tell you they do pressure you to sign the paperwork. It's not really the kind of pressure it's fun to have after you give birth, but it is what it is. They're going to pressure you. You're going to just have to refuse to sign it. You don't have to sign it, but they do have to report that they assisted in a birth. And they are going to report that to the vital statistics office. Now, when you go down to the vital statistics office, it will complicate things because you will not be able to get a letter of no record. I'm going to tell you exactly what you're going to get because I got one for one of my children before I learned better. You're going to get a birth certificate and it's going to say baby boy or baby girl, whatever your last name is. Okay. Now that's not a valid birth certificate, but it is a record of your child's birth, right? So it's not a valid birth certificate. What I mean is you can't use that to go get a social security number. If you took that birth certificate that says baby boy or baby girl, your last name, to the social security office, they would tell you we can't give you a social security card. This is not a valid birth certificate. I know this for a fact because I went through this whole thing. You guys remember I've been a mom for 27 years now. And so I have many kids. So I'm very familiar with this process. What I would say is this. That's going to complicate things for you because you won't be able to get the letter of no record, and it's going to make it harder ultimately to get a passport for your child. But you can still go through the process, but you won't get a letter of no record because your midwife is going to record your child's birth. You just will not have a valid birth certificate as long as you personally don't sign that paper. You won't have a birth certificate that is valid or usable. It will only be a record that your child was born. Now, I will say that if you guys don't want that problem, and everybody's not comfortable with this, then you would have a birth that is not midwife assisted, but that is assisted by a woman who has delivered babies or given birth several times. But for so many people, that is not a comfortable thing to do. So I'm just going to tell you that if you choose to use a midwife or you choose to have a baby at the hospital, you do not have to sign any documents pertaining to your child's birth. But the hospital, whether you sign their paperwork or not, has to report your child's birth. It will not give you a valid birth certificate, but it will create a record of your child's birth with vital statistics. If you go there and apply, they will give you a birth certificate that says baby boy, baby girl, last name you, but you cannot use that birth certificate for anything. You won't be able to use it to, let's say, get social services, to get a passport, to get a social security number. You can't use it for anything. It actually is a more complicated situation. I had this happen the first time I resolved to not get a birth certificate or social security number for my child. That happened to me. So I've actually been through that. So your midwife is not necessarily telling the truth. You don't have to sign the paperwork for the birth. Now, midwives, they pick on them a lot. So if you're having a home birth and you tell her you're not going to sign that paperwork, she's probably not going to deliver your baby. I'm just going to keep it real. If you're having a hospital birth, then she's not the one that's going to fill it out. The hospital like has an office for that. So you can do one of two things. You can choose not to use a midwife, or you can use your midwife. Don't argue with her right now. But after your baby is born, you have to mentally prepare yourself to stick to your guns and not sign any paperwork. Just tell her, I'm not going to sign anything. I understand you have to report my child's birth to the vital statistics office, but I'm not going to sign any paperwork. And you have to be prepared after you've given birth to a baby to stress yourself out slightly by refusing. And you have to be prepared for her to be resistant to you not wanting to sign it, but nobody can make you sign that paperwork. As long as you don't sign that paperwork, then your child will never have a valid birth certificate. In fact, if you wanted to get a birth certificate for your child after that, after refusing to sign the paperwork, it would be like a 1 year process. Like after so much time, I think it's a few months, you then would have to go through a whole 1 year process to get a valid birth certificate. So that's my personal experience with it. I can just tell you, and I used a midwife as well. Um, and I've had a hospital birth. And so I'm letting you know, like, yeah, that's my personal experience with that. So I'm glad you brought that up, I'm glad you brought that up though, because I've actually had other women come to me and say that. And I just had to be honest with them. Like, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be the type of birth certificate I told you about, and you won't be able to get that letter of no record. It's going to make the situation a little more complicated, but this is what I would do. Well, contact me privately. I don't want to say what I would do, but you can still get the passport. You'll still use the same methods, but you're going to get a rushed passport. So we can speak privately about like how to do that, but that's ultimately what you're going to do. So, yeah, yeah, you can definitely deny a birth certificate. Yeah, but she still has to report the birth. By law, she has to report the birth. If you go in there, and I have known midwives who won't report the birth, and then the parent goes into the vital statistics office and they're like, oh, well, who helped? Because they start asking you questions. Well, did anybody help you have your baby? And they're like, yeah, midwife so and so, and then get their midwife in trouble. right? So if you have a co-midwife that won't report her assisting with your birth, you can't then go into vital statistics and say you had a midwife assisted birth because then you're basically putting her on the chopping block for breaking the law. So you either need to not use a midwife or you need to protect your midwife by not outing her if she agrees to not, report your child's birth. So, um, straight from the gate said, "What's wrong with signing a birth certificate? What's not safe? What's wrong with signing a birth certificate? Well, nothing's wrong with it if that's your choice. My children don't have them. But if you choose to do something different, again, I'm not here to convince people to do it or not do it. I've already made a video about how to work without a social security number, and I talked about living without a birth certificate and social security card because that's what I did from my family. But I'm not here to convince people not to get those documents. If you want to get those documents, I don't care. Like, do you? Okay. Do you? And as far as it's not safe to have a birth without a doctor or midwife, that's not true. Um, Many people have at home births with their support system. You need somebody that knows how, you don't need a certified midwife. I've seen fathers deliver their babies personally. So, I mean, childbirth is innately dangerous and everybody has to do what they're comfortable doing, whether that be a hospital birth, using a midwife, having a support system there to help you with your birth. I'm not here to push anything, and I'm also not here to encourage people to not get a birth certificate and social security card. I'm just saying if you make that choice as somebody, a mom of 27 years who's had several children and made that choice, I'm just telling you the process. So this is not a topic for us to debate. I'm not going to debate back and forth about, you know, if people should be doing it or why people shouldn't do it. I'm not going to get into all that. I'm just not going to do it. Um, but many people do make that choice, but what many people don't have is access to regular people who also made that choice. Same thing with vaccination. You guys know I don't vaccinate. Like I said, mom of 27 years, I have several kids. I don't vaccinate my children. And I have a video on that, right? And I also provide a list of non vaccine or modified vaccine friendly doctors. A lot of times we hear people talk about these controversial topics, but that's not how they live their life. When I made my videos because I know how hard it was for me not being able to find reliable sources of information and not being able to find people that were like regular people in real life. Like you guys can see my family. You guys know I have a vlog channel. So you guys know I have like a regular life. There's not many regular people that talk about these things. So that's why I made my videos, not to be controversial or try to get people to follow some path, but just so the information would be out there. And so this video, because I made my first video working without a social security number, like I said, I'll attach it to the comment section in the description box after the video. And I provided really detailed information in the description box of that video, which I'll also copy and paste into this video and took you to the websites. But the purpose of this video is to answer all of the questions that people started asking me as a result of that video. I've had lots of families come to me since I made that video. And the last person who came to me, I just decided, well, so many people are coming to me, I'm going to just make a follow-up video. So I just want to be clear. If I have mods in here and straight from the gate is being a problem, just put them on a timeout. Um, yeah, you can reach out to me, CJs. Lots of people do. I'll be happy to help you. So, yeah, you can go to school without a birth certificate and you can go to school without a social security card. You can even go to college. When my son went to college, they just zeroed out his social security number. You guys, everybody doesn't have these documents. I've been a mom for long enough and I've operated without these documents with multiple children who are adults now, for long enough that I've encountered almost every possible situation, let me tell you. I really have at this point. Um, so, oh, it's okay, CJ. I mean, it's a process. Like I said, my first time out, I didn't sign the documents, but I didn't realize that it was going to get me a screwy, birth certificate that I couldn't use. So when you're starting out, if you don't know, it's totally fine. Like we make mistakes. If you have other children, you can, make more educated decisions. Um, so somebody said, what if the hospital doesn't give me a crib sheet? I thought this was a really cute question. So, the hospital always gives you a crib sheet, right? There's never a time when you don't get a crib sheet from the hospital. A crib sheet is literally like it's just the sheet that like when they're keeping your baby in the crib, it's got like your baby's footprint or something on it and it has the baby's name on it. And it's the hospital's way of not mixing up the babies. After your baby's born and you get ready to leave the hospital, you can just pick it up out of the little baby crib that they have in your room and just take it with you. So the hospital definitely gives all of us a crib sheet because they don't need it for anything and they only use it so that they don't mix up the babies. Like when they're, if you get your child circumcised, I don't circumcise my boys, but if you do something like that or the child has to get, whatever done, if they have to move the baby, the crib sheet is for them and you just take it. Just make sure you take it when you leave. Lots of people do take it as keepsakes. You can take it as a keepsake, but you'll also take it just so that you can have evidence, right, of your child's birth. Um, so the next question was, I came across another video saying that in place of having a birth certificate, you can create your own affidavit of live birth and have it notarized, and you record it with your local county clerk's office. Is this something that you have to do? Record the affidavit of live birth? Okay, let's be clear. Um, this is what I mean about people making videos who don't know what they're talking about. The whole point, if you're just going to record your child's birth with the okay, so recording your child's birth with the Office of Vital Statistics, right? Recording your child's birth with the county clerk, that is how you get a birth certificate. That's how you do it. When a child's birth is recorded with the county clerk or with the Vital Statistics Office, they automatically create a birth certificate for the child. And this is why I said, like, some people make YouTube videos and they really don't know what they're talking about. The goal is that the birth never get recorded with the state or the county. That's the goal, right? If you don't want a birth certificate for your child, then the goal is that you never record it with the county or the state. That way, you can go to the county or state and get a letter of no record so that you can go get your child a passport, right? Without using a birth certificate. So if you sign an affidavit and turn it over to the county clerk or the vital statistics office, they're going to use that the same way they would if the hospital recorded a birth or if a midwife recorded the birth. They're going to create a birth certificate for your baby. A birth certificate isn't you acknowledging that you had the baby. A birth certificate is when you go to the county and say, here, government, I want you to know that I had a baby. And then the government goes, well, thanks for telling us that you had a baby. Now we're going to make a certificate of live birth for that baby. So the object of giving birth, if you don't want a birth certificate for your child, is that nobody go to the government and say, here, government, I want you to know that I had a baby, because you're ultimately putting them in a position where they now want to create a certificate of live birth. If you don't want a birth certificate, what you do is you have your baby, right? It doesn't get recorded with the county or the state. You know, your child's birth, that's what I mean by it. I don't mean the baby. I mean the record of your child's birth is not something that you turn over to the government, right? Instead, you go ahead and um, you take your child to their baby checkup after they're born, right? So you do the little well baby checkup thing. You get the forms that the office requires. Remember, I say to get your children their passports young because it's so much harder for an adult who's never had a birth certificate or social security card to get a passport. But if you get your babies and your young children their passports while they're young, you can keep renewing them. And then when they become an adult, they don't have to worry about going through that process because you've already done the hard work for them. They'll already be grandfathered in, right? So that's the purpose of getting the passport young. But no, you absolutely don't want to get an affidavit of live birth that you create and get it notarized and give it to the state. Because if you do that, you're basically just doing the same thing that the hospital or the midwife's going to do, right? So that's why do not watch all YouTube videos. That was a bad, whatever video you watch, that was not, they were not very smart. Because it defeats the purpose, right? It defeats the purpose. Recording live births with the state or with the county are for people who want birth certificates. That's why you would record your child's birth with them. Otherwise, the only thing you want from them is a letter of no record, meaning we don't have a record of this child being born in our county or in our state. Okay. So, okay, so straight from the gate, I'm not going to go into this. You can go to my other video, Working Without a Social Security Number, and I talk about you don't need a birth certificate to work in the United States. If you have a passport, you don't need to. And I also talk about the benefits and I talk about the downsides to getting a passport or getting a birth certificate and social security number. So I talk about that in my first video. This video is not to talk about that. So if you're interested in the answer to that question, please go to my video, Working Without a Social Security Number, and you can listen to that video and that will answer that question. This is only to answer questions of people who are interested or have already made this choice, not to sell the idea, right? I'm not trying to sell the idea of why you shouldn't do it, but I do talk about the pros and cons in my other video. If you want to leave this video and go to that video, you can do that and you can hear what I say are the pros and cons. All right. The next question is, yes, if you don't have a social security number, you don't have to pay taxes. The IRS's website says that a social security number is required to pay taxes. If you have a social security number, you do have to pay taxes. You just absolutely do. So the next question is, after you leave the hospital with your baby, does anyone contact you later regarding not having filled out the birth certificate or social security paperwork? No. Once you leave the hospital, nobody's going to contact you about that. They're going to try to get you to do it in the hospital. If they can't get you to do it in the hospital, I've never had anybody contact me. I mean, somebody might call you and say, hey, because they probably think you did it on accident, right? Hey, you left and you didn't sign this paperwork. Do you want to come in and fill it out? Just say no. No, I don't. And hang up the phone, right? They're going to report, like I explained earlier, if you have your baby in a hospital, they will have to report that birth, right? But your signature on it is what allows for a valid birth certificate to be made. But remember what I said earlier, if you use a midwife who's going to report that birth that she assisted, or if you go to a hospital, you won't get a letter of no record. You will get a birth certificate. It just won't be valid for anything. The birth the birth certificate is going to say baby boy or baby girl and your last name. So I just want to keep reiterating that because that's what you're going to get. And then you still can get a passport for your child, but it does convolute the process a little bit because they can't give you a letter of no record because they do have a record of your child's birth. They just don't have a valid birth certificate for your child. So it will convolute the process, but no, nobody's going to call you or try to force you, especially not for the social security number. If they do call you, it's going to be because they think that you made a mistake or you accidentally left without it. You can just say no. I don't get into long explanations with people. I never have. I say no and I just keep it moving. Like we're not going to go back and forth about this. I'm not going to explain myself. Um, it's just easier that way. I'm polite about it, but yeah, no, nobody's going to chase you down so that you have to get it. Um, Champion of truth. No, nobody brings the police to your house for filling it out. I mean, I don't know. That person had to be lying. It's not mandatory. So nobody's going to bring the police to your house so that you can be forced to sign some paperwork. That doesn't vary by state. That I don't know what that was about, but it wasn't about the fact that she didn't sign for a birth certificate. Now, maybe she was being a weirdo and they thought the child was in danger because, like I said, a lot of people have, um, who talk about this topic, they're weirdos. Like, if you watch their videos, they're weird. They start talking funny and, under statute XYZ and, I'm a free man and a sovereign man. And, they start being weird. If you're a weirdo, then somebody might show up at your house based on the fact that you're weird and they think something's wrong with you. But um, like I said, I've been a mother for almost 30 years now, and I've given birth to a lot of children in the hospital, with a midwife, in a lot of ways. And I've helped a lot of people, and I know a lot of people that don't have these documents. And there's no law they're voluntary. That's why you're applying for them. So nobody's going to take you to jail or bring police to your house over that. Now, again, if you are being an odd, kind of weird person doing weird stuff, then they are required to report your weirdness. I would say, because you know how they are these videos and people are going into court and they don't want to cross onto the threshold. And I could talk about how to avoid having to go to court. But, they don't want to cross into the threshold and they're like, "Okay, well, I'm a free man on the land. My name is John, capital J, lowercase o, lowercase h, lowercase n," because they think if it's on all capital letters, like something's wrong. If you're being one of those kind of weirdos, if you're talking about, and I represent the straw man, such and such, if you start being a weirdo, yes, somebody probably is going to come to your house because they're going to think something's wrong with you and you're leaving the hospital with a baby, but you're a crazy person. Don't act like a weirdo. Just be just be normal, be cool. Don't start rattling off a bunch of weird stuff and people are like, "What the hell is this person talking about?" I don't it's not necessary, you know? "Oh, I'm not signing those." I talk about what I did. Like, go to my video and I talk about like what my response was because the lady kept like coming to my room. I don't want to remake my first video, but if you go to my first video, I talk very honestly about my experiences and any pushback that I got and how I dealt with it. Um, but my main rule of thumb is don't be a weirdo. Do Yeah, the straw man is bogus. Like, I can't stand people that do that and like the lowercase this and don't write your name in all caps and write a letter to the Social Security office and say this and that. Like those weirdos, do not do that. They do not don't do that. It's not necessary. These people are low key crazy. Like just don't do any of that. Don't call yourself a sovereign citizen. Don't be weird, okay? Just be a normal person. Be personable, obviously know your stuff. Um, Carry yourself well, be intelligent. Like it just just being a regular person who's nice goes very far. People are resistant. I mean, I talk about it in my other video. People have reactions when people do things differently, but it's not our job to educate them. Our job is to keep things as simple as possible so that we can get our desired result with as little conflict, right? So don't go into lengthy explanations as to why you're not, I don't want a birth certificate or social security number for my kid. I'm blah, blah, blah. Like, don't do that. All right. Just don't sign the paperwork. I talk about it. I sent the lady away. If you want to know what I did when I was in a hospital or when I had a midwife, I talk about it very openly in my first video. Again, it's titled Working Without a Social Security Number, and I talk in depth about it in that video. I don't want to get into the stories because I don't want to remake that video again. I've already made the video. Go watch the first one. Um, Another question is you mentioned not filling out any forms pertaining to the birth certificate and social security number. Does that also include any initial pre-registration forms for labor and delivery that the hospital asks you to fill out while being admitted? No. Fill out your admission forms, okay? The admission forms are just so that they can be prepared for you when you come in to have your baby. Now, you don't have to put names. Like some of the forms will ask, like if you already have a name for the baby, I wouldn't put that down. But fill out your pre-admission forms. The pre-admission forms are just there if you're having a hospital birth. They're just there so that they can know who's coming in, who they can expect, who's having a baby, what your insurance is. Like I said, just be a normal person. You don't have to do extreme things. Just fill out your admission forms, okay? They need those forms if you want to have a hospital birth so that they can properly service you with your childbirth. Um, the only forms you're worried about signing or not signing are forms for the actual birth certificate and actual social security number. And those forms, they do not give out until after there's an actual live baby born, right? That's when they start creating those forms. Free Now said you can work in the United States without a social security number, signing a W-4. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. This is not true. If you don't sign the forms that your employer wants you to sign, they don't have to hire you. Okay? They don't. They don't have to hire you. And a lot of employers won't. Again, please go to my Working Without a Social Security Number video. I talk about when you're filling out the forms that are required for you to work. I give some example for states, and I also talk about educating yourself because if you do go to an employer with a birth certificate or social security number and you only go with your passport, that's going to be something different they may not have experienced with an American citizen, right? So you do. There's ways to handle it. I'm not going to go into it here, but you only need a passport to work. Um, for the W-4, there is a document that your employer will need in place of that W-4. If you refuse to sign the W-4, a lot of employers are not going to work with you because they're not going to know what to do. But I talk about all this, right? I talk about all this in my initial video. Can I just you know what? Let me put the link to my initial video in the chat. I'm just going to do that. Um, Yeah, I'm just going to put the link to my initial video in the chat, and I go over there and I talk about, in lieu of a W-4, what needs to happen because you can't just not fill out the W-4. Your employer is required to provide that. So there's another document that goes along with the W-4 that your employer needs to have. And you know what? It's so much easier if you bring it for them. Okay. You need to find the one for your state. Hold on. I'm going to put the link to my other video in the chat. I probably should have done this already. Hold on. I'm going to come on from another device. Okay. There goes the link to my other video. And I actually go into detail about the W-4 And I give an example. I actually use Texas as the example of what other form you need to bring. Now, depending on the state, the process can be more convoluted. But what I would say is don't put the burden on your employer to figure out what to do with you when you don't want to give them a social security number, when you're giving them a W 4. Now, remember, you have to not have a social security number. If you have a social security number, you need to fill out the W 4. But if you don't have a social security number or your child doesn't have a social security number, your passport is sufficient. And there is another form um, that you do need to fill out. And your employer is going to need that for their protection because you don't have to sign anything. Okay. But they don't have to hire you. All right. So let's be clear about that. You don't have to sign anything. Nobody can force you to sign anything, but you won't get a job. So if you want a job, then go to my other video and and I explain how you can not fill out those forms but still get hired without it being a complicated process, right? The reality is no, none of us have to sign anything. None of us have to fill out anything. And any employer can choose to hire us however they want. I mean, whole illegal aliens get hired, right? But the reality is most employers are not going to hire you. 99.9% of them aren't going to hire you, so you're not going to have a job. So please, you guys go to my other video if you're interested in working without a social security number and you're interested in what I should do in lieu of the W 4 legally that an employer will accept so that you can have a roof over your head and food to eat if you're not wealthy enough to not work, then go to my other video because I give you an actual real solution and I go to the state's website where they talk about what to do if your employee doesn't have a social security number and they give the form for it on your state's website. Every state has a requirement for that situation. The thing is that your potential employer won't know about that. So for me, I always advise printing off what the state requires from the employer first. Like there's a form that they're going to need to have to protect themselves because they have to do that for the IRS. Um, and just taking that with you. Don't expect your employer to figure out how to hire you without a W 4 because you're simply not going to get the job. They're just going to give the job to somebody that's going to sign the W 4, right? So for regular people who need work to live and to pay their rent, go to my video and I will very clearly explain it. I go so that you can see I'm not making it up. I go to like the state's website where it explains to employers like what to do if somebody doesn't have a social security number. And I show you the form that you have to, well, you don't have to print it off. Your employer should have it. But like I said, most employers don't encounter American citizens without a social security number. So if you're counting on an employer to jump through hoops so that they can hire you, that's not going to happen. It's much easier if you take the form with you, have it ready, and I would even have the little website pulled up, already so that when they ask for it, you can say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't have a social security number, but I did bring this." And on our website, on the Texas or on the California website, it just says I had to bring this form since I don't have a social security number. And then the employer can feel comfortable because they need that W 4 for the IRS because they are required to give the IRS a W 4 for all their employees, if possible, right? So, anyway, I'm not going to get into it here, but go to my other video, right? I'm not going to let you help me because you don't know what you're talking about. So, go to my other video and watch my other video. Like I said, do not listen to the Freemen on the land people and the Moors and all. Like, don't listen to them. They're crazy. Don't listen to them. Um, so let's continue because I hate doing these videos because I want to help people, but I also feel like there's just so many weird people out there who are like very zealous and like low key crazy that talk about this topic. And I try not to sensationalize this topic. I try to just come from it from like Like, I'm not trying to like stick it to the government. I'm just talking about like as an American, like legally how we can operate without these documents versus like, you know, it brings out, you get two groups of people when you have these conversations. You get weirdos and you get people who genuinely are curious about like, is this a thing that I can make this work? And does anybody really do this? And just anyway, that's why I made the video, because I noticed when I was researching it years and years ago, again, 2 decades ago, when I was researching this, there were a lot of weird people and they were doing weird stuff. And I was like, it can't be this complicated. Um, so I had to kind of, you know, sort it out for myself. And um, I had to learn through my experiences with my own children, right? So me choosing this route for my family over the course of, almost 30 years is how I personally came with this knowledge, to how do I make sure my kids have insurance? Can my kids go to college? Can they go to school? Like putting a kid in college, right? Putting children in public school. I homeschool now, as you guys know, but my older kids, they went to public school. How do you do that, right? Um, and so when I'm speaking from like personal experience and having children and having to provide for them, like as a normal person who doesn't do extreme things. um, and so that was the purpose of the first video I made. I made that first video because there are just a lot of weirdos online and I wanted to provide a video that wasn't. And if you look at the comments of that video, a lot of people say like, this is the most straightforward, comprehensive, you know, not weird video I've seen on this topic, which is why I made the video, because it was straightforward. It wasn't weird. It wasn't like off in the left field somewhere. It was just straight to the point, and super simple, so much easier than people make it out to be. Um, Do I have a list of pediatricians in Las Vegas, Nevada that I could recommend? Yes. Now, in my vaccination video, I actually showed you guys where to get a list of really good pediatricians that work well with um, families that are have alternative ways, right, of managing their households. Um, that list has since been removed from the internet. But I still have it. I have it, me and a few other moms, we actually saved the list. So I do have that list. And if you contact me privately, what I've done is I normally just give the list of doctors that I have for your state. What I'll say is that these particular doctors, a lot of times it's hard to get into their office. Sometimes there are waiting lists. So I would go beforehand, you know what I mean? And like while I was still pregnant or my wife was still pregnant. Um, but yes, I do. Well, I think I show part of the list on that video. So you can probably go and see part of the list. But that particular list, which was very comprehensive, a pediatrician actually put that list together. An anti-vax pediatrician actually put that list together, and of like modified vaccine schedule friendly, or no vaccine friendly doctors. Um, and so it's a very valid list. I've used the list for my own kids. I've given the list out to other parents. So as far as that, you guys can reach out to me privately, which I've had parents do. Um, or you can go back to that video and I think I show it, but I probably don't go through every state. I think I just go there to show the list itself. Um, and I normally don't send the whole list out because it's a long list. I normally just, if you tell me what state you're in, I'll just send you the doctors for that state. But also keep in mind, there may not be a doctor in your immediate area. I know the first time I used the list for one of my kids, the closest doctor was an hour and a half away, right? The closest doctor was an hour and a half away. But for me, I've also taken my kids to Children's Hospital. I think a big thing, like when you're dealing with pediatricians, is how you carry yourself. You know what I mean? I hate to say that, but like how you carry yourself, and if you're not confrontational, I think I even shared, this is like a separate topic from social security number and birth certificate, but I even share the letter that I wrote um, to include in my child's medical record, because I don't sign anything at the pediatrician's office either if you don't vaccinate. And I talk about that in my video. And I've shared the letter that I wrote to include in my child's medical record in lieu of like signing that. And I've never had a problem. Like I don't vaccinate my kids. Like I said, I have kids from the age of 6 to the age of 27, 26, 27. I can't remember how old my oldest is. He's 26 or 27. And I've never, not one time, had a problem with one of my children's pediatricians. Ever. Never had a problem. Like I said, a lot of it is just about being polite, not over talking. Like when my pediatrician was like, "So why don't you want to, blah, blah, blah?" You know, I didn't get into a whole discussion about it. Um, a lot of this is just not just being a normal person, because the idea that people have of those of us who don't have social security numbers or don't use birth certificates or don't vaccinate, the idea that people have of us is that we're weirdos and we're crazy and we're kooky. And so if you go in there and you're a crazy kooky weirdo, then that's going to like validate their points, right? And so that's why I made my initial video, which I'll put the link in the chat again. That's why I made my initial video to about not working without a social security number and about not vaccinating. I made those videos because as a mother in real life, right, who's made these choices, I had not seen any videos that were practical by moms that were really doing it. It was always somebody with like a board and like lecturing and like making like all these laws, rattling them off and never really giving links or never really, you know what I mean, giving real information that like used. And if you tried to vet what they were saying, it was like obscure and weird and some things didn't even exist. And so my goal was just to like come from a perspective of a person who's made those choices and lived in life and thrived without a problem, without any issues, without any confrontations on it, that, got out of control, and just give like sound advice. Titan said, what law in the Internal Revenue Code requires Americans to fill out a W-4? Nobody cares about the Internal Revenue Code. This is what I'm talking about. Like I made an entire video and I didn't mention the Internal Revenue Code ever because nobody cares, right? Like I said, you don't have to sign anything you don't want to sign. But in my video, I talk about if you want a job, like if you need a job to pay your rent, how you navigate an employer that only knows to give you W-4. You know what I'm saying? Like who cares what the Internal Revenue Code says? At the end of the day, the IRS is not at your workplace when you're applying for a job. The information I give people is like when you go in to apply for a job at such and such company or flipping burgers or whatever you do, what happens when you're dealing with your employer? You're not citing internal revenue stuff. That's not what you're going to do. They're going to look at you like you're weird and they're going to move on to the next person and hire them because they don't have time for your crap, right? So that's why I made my video. My first video, please go watch it because there's no point to talk about the Internal Revenue Code. There's no point, right? It doesn't even apply to people without social security numbers anyway. And you won't get anywhere with your employer by being like, Internal Revenue Code does not require, and like it's just, there's no point in having these conversations. And that's why I don't like to indulge that kind of silliness, because it's like, what in the world, right? I've worked I worked for 12 years without anything. Not even a passport, right? I personally did. Um, so Yeah. No, nobody cares about no employer. No employer is going to want to hear you talk about the Internal Revenue Service. Yes. Anybody who's applied for a job, if you went into your job to apply for a job and they were like, "Can you fill out this W-4?" and you were like, "According to IRS code such and so, I am not mandatorily required to fill out this form." Do you think you'd get a job? Think about the jobs you've applied for. Can you imagine doing that at a job interview? Or like when they're like, okay, we're hiring you. Now go to HR. Can you imagine doing that in HR? Do you think they're going to keep you on? No, don't be a weirdo. Nobody cares. Nobody wants to hear you talk about the Internal Revenue Code. But what they do want is what I talk about in my last video, which is for you to not be a weirdo and not start quoting IRS code or Internal Revenue Code and all this stuff and talking about what the IRS does and doesn't want. Like, no, don't be a weirdo. I think the moral of the story in this situation is don't be a weirdo. Don't get excitable. Don't start trying to rattle off laws. Like, don't be a weirdo. Be normal. Because when you do something that is uncommon, the thing that's really going to make it easy for you is to be normal. Do not turn into some crazy zealot. Just be a normal person so that they think to themselves when you're giving them information they've never had before, right? You're not talking too much, you're not rattling off laws and code, you're not talking about I'm not required to fill this form out. You're not doing that because you're not a weirdo. Okay? You're going to be calm, you're going to be rational, you're going to be normal. You're going to come with the piece of paperwork that they need. You're going to be brief. You're not going to talk too much. Like, don't talk too much. Anybody who's come to me personally and I've helped you, you know that I've said this. I've said, don't talk too much. Like, you don't, you're not, they don't, you're not giving a lecture. Okay. The goal is to get the job, right? The goal is to get the passport. The goal is not to be confrontational and ridiculous. Um, so yeah. Yeah, don't be a weirdo. Kind of how you're behaving now, Titan, the energy you're giving now is weird. If you do that in person with an employer, yes, you're being a weirdo. That's what I mean. That's exactly what I mean. If you give the energy to a potential employer that you're giving me in this chat room, they simply won't hire you. And because you're broke, because you have no job, you won't be suing anybody for anything. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't be a weirdo. That's exactly what I mean. I mean, don't be a weirdo. Don't do some of the things you see people doing in this chat. Don't talk like that. Don't behave like that. Like, don't do it. Or you're going to be homeless on the street because nobody's about to hire you if you behave like that, right? You can still exercise your rights as an individual without going off into la la land somewhere. It's not necessary. It's not necessary. It's really not. So, yeah. So with that said, well, Titans, that's not what I asserted, but you can go to my other video where I specifically talk about working without a social security number. I haven't said much at all about not working with a social security number here. What I said was I did a whole video on the topic and you can go watch my video. Okay. So with that said, my email is in the description box of every video. So with that said, look, if you're going to be rude, I'm just going to put you out my chat. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're a nameless, faceless person on YouTube, and I'm not a nameless, faceless person on YouTube. Like, people can see me, and they know who I am, and you're just ranting like a crazy person in my chat. And unfortunately, these kind of conversations bring out the crazy people. These kind of conversations, and I think that's why a lot of people don't take us seriously when we have these conversations, is because every weirdo that's watched one too many YouTube videos on YouTube comes out in these conversations and they are weird. But if you want a non weird, regular person advice, I'm happy to give that just based on my personal experiences and what has worked for my family and what has worked for people that I know that have made this choice that are just regular human beings who need to live regular lives and got to take their kids to the doctor and don't want to, get into big confrontations with, the system. Like, my goal is to minimize my contact with the government, right? And so I just try to be cool. I exercise my rights, but I do it in a non confrontational way, and I do it in a simple way because at the end of the day, when you deal with these offices, hospitals, um, employers, you know, doctors, these are just people, right? They're just people. And ultimately, that one on one interaction is what's going to get those individual people to respect your rights. And so it's all about knowing what you're talking about, being really normal in your delivery, not being an extremist when you talk to people, and making it easy for them, right? Just make it easy. When you make it easy, it's so much better. So, were there any other questions I wanted to answer? No, I think I was going through the list of like the questions people have asked me, and let me see. Okay. Yeah, I think that is pretty much it. Um, I don't think I have any other questions. I think most of the other questions that people gave out to me was like, "Can I talk to you?" And all of you guys know, anybody who asks to speak to me privately, you guys know that I always speak to everybody who asks me on this subject. I always try to help as much as I can. I really want to stress one last thing though. If you already have these documents, despite what anybody on YouTube tells you, you have to you have to pay your taxes. You have to submit those documents when you work. Um, if you already have these documents, but if you don't have them, because I have had some adults come to me who don't have them because their parents were kind of on the same page I do, but their parents just didn't educate them. Or if you don't want your children to have them, for whatever reason, remember, people act like it's an end all be all. So for me, I'm a mother of many children. I didn't make these choices for my children, but my children can become adults and decide to get these documents. You know what I mean? It's not difficult. I keep good records for them. They'll already have their passports. And so if they choose to get a social security number or, get a valid birth certificate later in life, that's a choice that they can make for themselves. For me, it's just a choice that I chose not to make for them. I did not want to lock them into something that they cannot leave, right? For no reason. I wasn't looking for, earned income credit, child tax credit at the end of the year. I didn't, I felt like I could go without the government social services. Um, the benefits that the government gives in exchange for you obtaining those documents were things that I personally felt I could live without, even if it made life a little bit harder. And that way, when my children got older, they would have anonymity, and they would also have the ability to choose for themselves. They could choose, hey, I want a social security number. They can choose, okay, no, I don't. I want to keep living my life this way. They could choose whatever path they want to take. But for me, it was important not to take that path for them because really, if you think about it, your child doesn't benefit from those documents, right? You do. The person that uses those documents the most is going to be the parent. And so a lot of times not having those documents makes it harder for us as a parent because these are all these things we can't now get and exploit because we don't have these documents. And it makes us work harder as parents. But your child's not using these documents for anything. Your child doesn't need those documents. Um, So that's something to consider. And then I think, especially with the Social Security number, um, the Social Security number is a big one. Like you lock your child into a lifetime of taxes, just so that you can write them off every year. And the question is like, is that a decision that you want to make for your children? Do you want to be the one that makes a lifelong decision for them? Think about how that decision has affected you. Can you suck it up for 18 years so that they can have choices, so that they can have options, um, and they can make an educated decision about how they want to live their lives? These are things that are normally only exercised by the wealthy, because the wealthy aren't worried about engaging with the system in certain ways because they can afford to pay their way through everything. But these are normally trappings of the poor, because the poor need so much more assistance and help, you know? And this then makes these documents mandatory, right? Because whenever you ask the government for a benefit, right? Whatever that benefit from them is, um, they ask you for these documents because that's the trade off. So that's just some food for thought. I'm going to leave this video up. I do encourage you guys to go watch my first video. I will put the link in the chat again. This video was just to answer questions. The last video really gave the information. So if you're looking for, Walter Howard, that's not true. That's absolutely not true. Taxes are not citizen based. They're not. They're not. You can't even file taxes. You cannot even file personal income tax if you don't have a social security number. You can't even do it. It's not possible. If you don't have a social security number, you cannot file taxes. The IRS's own website says that, right? Like, I don't know where you guys get this from. You can't. It's not even about if you having to. It's not possible. It's not even possible to file taxes without a social security number, right? It's not possible. I want to make that really clear. So I just don't I don't know where you guys I don't know where you guys get some of this. But yeah, if rather than us get into a big thing about the W-4s, just go watch my other video. I talk about the W-4, I talk about the I-9, right? Which is like, are you legally a citizen to be able to work? And I talk about the W-4, and how you navigate that without birth certificate or social security number. I talk about that um, in depth. Other questions I've actually had is, how do I get a driver's license and stuff like that? That's why you need your passport. That's why I advise that you get your passport, that you get your children passports. So I I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's it. Let me see. I might have one more thing. Um I think that's all that I have. So with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Um And if you guys have additional questions, you can ask them. I probably won't do a Q&A right away, but I do answer questions in the comment section as well. So I'll talk to you guys later.